They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Program to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
There we go. Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful. Friends, tonight we are honored at Rogueways to host one of the baddest of the bad, bringing the conspiracy, paranormal, and wackiness to the forefront with the long-running and well-loved hit Our Big Dumb Mouth podcast, aka OBDM. And the legend and the warrior, one of the four horsemen of the Union of the Unwanted, and all-around badass, Midnight Mike. Mike, thanks so much for coming on Rogueways tonight. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you. It's quite the intro. I'm doing pretty well. I don't know if I'm a badass. I've just been doing podcasting for an incredibly long time.
See, I think that makes you a badass, though. You're one of the old school. You're like the person who helps bring all of this to people. And we were just talking before the show. It's like, I think the 2 times I've been on Union of the Unwanted, you didn't even talk, and you were saying, well, yeah, that's because it's for other people to talk, and that also makes you a badass. It's very kind of you.
I talk enough on my own show.
Yeah.
And for Union of the Unwanted, it is for other people to come on and talk. I'll chime in every now and again, but my expertise, if you want to call them that, are mostly focused on goofy news stories, UFO, humanoids, paranormal stuff like that. I cover the current events like COVID, but that's not my wheelhouse. And I have my opinions on it, but I don't do deep research like you or Whitney Webb or Grimerica. You seem to do a much better job than I do. So.
Well, thank you so much. Just being put in the same sentence with Whitney Webb kind of just blew my mind. So I think she's way, way beyond me, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's just like I read articles and I do my best to put like everyone else to try to make sense of what's going on. And for when it comes to COVID, we were covering that on OBDM. As soon as it started talking about it, then we were suggesting that, it could be a lab leak. It could be overblown. It could be, we are also theorizing that it could be way worse than what they are leading on because we didn't know anything. And we were experiencing a lot of streaming issues on YouTube. YouTube was taking down videos. They were stopping my stream midstream. And that kind of led to Sam, myself, and Ricky and Charlie getting together and saying, hey, what the heck's going on? Let's just hang out and talk. And the Union of the Unwanted started, and we just started bringing on people that were more educated in certain areas to talk about it. And that's why I just keep my mouth shut most of the time.
Yeah, you're like learning and taking in. Yeah. Well, this is like at least half of why I decided to do Rogueways, because I love learning things, and having experts on, or having intelligent people on, or having people who have done something longer than me, or any of these things, and getting to just ask them questions is like my favorite thing to do. So I totally relate to that. And I do have a pointless question of the episode to start off with, Mike, and that is, it's super important, actually, and it's not often asked anymore, unfortunately, and it is a forgotten childhood favorite of, what is your favorite dinosaur and why?
It would probably be, what was the one with the armored back? It's not the Stegosaurus. It was the one that was more, it may have been the Allosaurus, maybe. I don't know. But it had the mace tail. It had like a club-like tail. It was almost like a dinosaur turtle, but with an awesome medieval mace on the end of the tail. Yeah. That was one of my favorites. I love that one.
It's maybe a Kunbarasaurus.
Maybe.
Although it seems like there's a lot of them, actually. All right, I'm just going to show the audience real quick.
I thought it was maybe an Allosaurus, but I might be wrong.
I think there's multiple. Here, let's see. You can't see this, but the audience can. There's a Cychania, a Sauropelta, a Eupolecophilus, Sylvosaurus, Talarigus, Nodosaurus. None of them are. Oh, Ankylosaurus. Maybe it's that one. Yeah, that one has like a thing on the end of its tail.
Yeah, that was my favorite for whatever reason growing up. I can't pinpoint why, but it did, like, all the drawings and illustrations that I saw, it did have like a cute little face, and it was just trying to mind its own business, and it just built its defenses up to kind of take on anything it wanted and just go about its life as best as could.
And it's like a pretty cute dinosaur as far as dinosaurs go. For me, that's probably not your reason for choosing it, but I like
cute animals, like cute dinos. So yeah.
And speaking of dinosaurs, now that I'm thinking of that, what do you believe that they are real or fake or planted there by Satan, or what do you think's going on with dinosaurs?
I think that they are real creatures. The 65 million years ago, that's the year that's given. I don't get into the dating of that. I believe that dinosaurs existed, give or take a few million years. Who gives a darn? But I think they were real creatures that walked the earth at some point in time, and they're, for the most part, no longer here as we understand dinosaurs. They evolved into something else, or they were taken out by a comet, or they evolved and built rocket ships and took off.
Yes, I love that. That would be my favorite if they came back and were like, whoa, who are you people? What the hell happened?
I think that was the plot to an 80s cartoon called Dino Saucers, but who knows? It might be real.
Yeah, it could be. Do you go into it all whether or not dinosaurs became, oil and gas, and that's what oil is?
So I've done like a little bit of looking into that, whether we're driving around in basically this fossil juice.
Fossil juice.
And in my mind, I've done no statistics on this whatsoever. I would imagine, how many dinosaurs would there have had to have been in order to sustain our oil consumption over the past 100 years? It would seem like an insane amount of vegetation and dinosaurs. I would say we'd burn through a couple trillion dinosaurs at this point, if that was true.
Yeah.
So how much, I know it's not just dinosaur bones, but it's like in vegetation, all the breaking down of carbon-based material, and that what produces that sweet, sweet oil that we all love. But then you hear that there's a conspiracy that I think it's abiotic.
Yeah.
That certain oil fields will replenish themselves, and that the oil scarcity is mainly artificial, and that there's plenty of oil. It's not going to go away, but you gotta bottleneck it so there can be top-down control of it.
Yeah, just like they do with diamonds, and everything that we think is precious and rare seems to be actually plentiful, perhaps. And I've never thought about it quite like that, like how many dinosaurs were there that died? Plus, I'm just thinking as you're describing that, if something right now came and let's say an asteroid came and wiped out all of humanity and our bones became the next oil, what is there just massive piles of dinosaurs just happening to be like all together in a crater waiting so that they can all turn to oil together? Like, how did it all? Yeah, it's like really good.
I just don't know. I personally haven't looked into. I'm sure there's engineers and there's geologists that have really dissected the exact amount of dinosaurs burned at this point, but I haven't seen a number, and I'd like to know, especially when it comes to like environmentalism. You would imagine they would have a calculated number that here is the estimated dinosaurs that were existing during that time period that produced X amount of oil, so we have a really good projection of how much longer we have in order to, it just runs out. But I haven't seen that number. They throw out the number 100 years, but they said that 20 years ago, I remember hearing that number, and we still seem to be chugging along just fine. And in fact, I think they keep finding more oil at this point. So
yeah, that seems pretty fishy. I just don't, none of it makes sense the more I think about it. And then the more I think about it, I wonder who was it who decided to just never question this and be like, no one needs to test it or look into it or like prove the link between oil and bones or whatever it's supposed to be. Like, we all just accept it and move on. It's very strange to me.
It is. We were taught that in middle school pretty much. and it's just accepted as common knowledge, and we've just kind of moved on. There's no great oil debate anymore about how it's made. I'm sure in certain conspiracy communities it's talked about, but by and large, you're not going to see it on the front page news. Like it's just it is there, and everyone just moved past it. And I'm surprised it's not revisited more often.
Yeah, it seems like something that some geniuses somewhere would just wonder about and start to work on, but I don't know if we have that anymore. The great age of the thinkers is maybe long gone. But speaking of childhood favorites and dinosaurs, what was childhood like for you?
Childhood was, well, I'm a middle kid,
Ah,
and I have an older brother that's 2 years older than me, and a younger brother who's about 8 years younger than me.
so you got
But
beat up and beat up others.
I got mostly beat up. So starting at age 2 to about 15, lots of bullying.
Yeah.
So relentlessly picked on. Rocks through your head, BB gun shot at me.
Because those were the days when bullying was like real.
Yeah, it was kind of brutal. Like I lived next door to an older kid. He was probably like 13. I was like 6 or 7, and they just threw like rotten tomatoes at me. They killed my cat.
No.
Oh yeah, they were kind of brutal. Then lived next to dirt hills, and they chucked a rock at me and cracked my skull open, got a concussion. So it was kind of brutal up until sophomore year of high school. It eased off, but I fought my way through pretty much middle school. I got into a lot of fights in 7th and 8th grade, a few fights in the freshman year, and just kind of chilled out for a little bit after that. So thankfully.
Man. Yeah, that is fucked up. You hear a lot about like bullying nowadays, and I'm always like, yeah, it's not cool. Like, we don't want people to be bullied. I get it. But I also think back to shit like that, and I'm like, I feel like that was way more common in like my parents' era and even our era when we were kids. That it was actually like brutalization, like severe, and that adults just didn't do shit about it.
No, they didn't. The teachers didn't do much. And then when I would come home, my mom saw exactly what was going on. She'd go out there and yell at the kids, but the kids' parents didn't really care that much. Or they would blame it on me, like, oh, Mike was shooting his slingshot shot at us. And I was like, no, I wasn't. You were shooting screwdrivers at me.
Yeah.
I shot back at you because you were shooting screwdrivers at my head.
Because you killed my cat.
So it's like a 6-year-old versus a couple of 13, 14-year-olds.
Wow.
It's like, it was just, looking back on it was a little traumatic, and it wasn't the most, fun, but I had a pretty good childhood. I got to ride around on BMX bikes and skateboard, and lived a pretty good life in a small town in between Akron and Canton, Ohio, and got to ride dirt hills and be pretty safe. So it was nice.
That is nice. I feel like we were more feral, back then. Like, for me at least, like, we just ran around all day long, wherever,
Oh, yeah.
neighbors' houses, like, whatever, and come home by nightfall, you're okay. And now, like, people don't let their children out of sight. And what do you think is missing most from, childhoods today?
A lack of mystery. It seems like everything is given to them on the phone or the internet. There is no, in my opinion, there seems to be no work to discover your culture, to discover your people. And I had to really work to find the punk rockers and the mischiefs that I wanted to hang out with. They weren't in my hometown. I had to travel to local like dive bars in Canton, Ohio, or Akron or Cleveland to find like-minded people that were into more subversive stuff, the underground, like zines and stuff like that. In my hometown of like 4,000 people, you couldn't find that kind of stuff. So when I was like ready to discover that stuff at 7th, 8th grade, there was just, you didn't know how to discover it. And then thankfully, like bands like Nirvana kind of broke open the door for DIY kind of stuff. And then you just kind of like, oh, what's that band, Rancid or Green Day? And then I would read all the liner notes of every CD I would get or record, and it's like, what's that band they're mentioning about? What's that band they're talking about? What's that? And I would just try to find out what those bands were, buy them, and then that would lead you down to, oh, what's maximum rock and roll? What's Punk Planet? Oh, and then it opens up your world to this subculture of like-minded people who are somewhat rebellious. They have different ways of thinking, more anarchistic, more fuck the government, more communistic, depending on what genre of punk you're listening to, but all very artistic, and very much in the DIY, do-it-yourself. No one's going to help you, so you might as well start doing it yourself, putting out records or booking your own shows, making your own art. You know, in high school, I printed my own comic book because I wasn't going to get, a comic book deal. I wasn't that good of an illustrator, so I just went to Kinko's, started printing up my own comic and selling it to people. So mostly my friends, and I kind of carried that throughout my entire life. Starting the podcast back in 2006, like I got the equipment. Let's just start doing something and start having fun. Maybe something will happen.
That's so awesome how that all comes together. Like trained you, your childhood and the way you kind of come up, predisposes you to these things, and you just carry it through. And it's true, we used to have to work a lot harder to figure things out at all. And you're lucky if you kind of knew people who did. And, my guy described someone bringing him like Behold a Pale Horse and like these other books, and him just being like, holy shit, like, what is this? And, now, like you said, there's no mystery and everybody can just find out anything. And in a way, that's a blessing. And in a way, it's kind of a curse. It's like, if you don't have to work hard for it, you don't really develop skills and personality as much per se, which is interesting.
I think it's a curse.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
it is a curse, because when you're growing up, you have limited choices. You have a limited palette to work with, so you don't have a paralysis of decision making. And now I think kids actually have it tougher because everything is an option for them, and they may wind up doing nothing because I don't know if they might not have the tools or the skills to make those decisions. Where when we were growing up, you could choose a couple different things.
Yeah.
Now they can choose a million different things. They might not choose any of them.
That's a really good point. You have way too many options. What are you going to choose? That's like actually way harder than just having a few. How old were you when like the internet first hit and you experienced it and it blew your mind?
When it blew my mind, so I experienced the internet in the mid 90s. And when it blew my mind is most of my friends were older, like 2 to 3 years older than me. And we were friends because we were playing like D&D and role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. They went on to college and they discovered something called MUD, multi-user dungeons. And they're like, Mike, you got to come to the local community college and try this out. And I was like, okay. And so we sat down, and this is probably like 95, probably like 94, 95.
Yeah.
And we were playing a text network game. So it's this pure text where you're pressing N to go north. It's like playing Zork, but everything's like you into a room and it smells like a rat has been here. And what do you want to do? And it was it blew my mind because we're all sitting in this computer lab with our own characters doing this text navigating of this dungeon. And I was blown away. I was like, this is interesting. Then I'm also playing that same game with people in different labs across the country. And I was like, holy crap. And they're like, you haven't seen anything yet. Then we started playing Doom. We started with networking Doom on the PC and the very first versions of Warcraft. And I was just, at that point, I was like, this is insane. Yeah. And I knew I wanted to be, whatever it was, I knew it was very important. I just wish I knew back then how important it was going to be. Else I would have geared my career a little differently.
Yeah, we could have done so many things had we seen all that was coming. It's just totally true. Yeah, MUD blew my mind. I was I think it was 96, 97 when I first heard of MUD, and I never played it because I was really busy doing a lot of drugs. But the people who played it blew my mind because they were paying money to, I don't know if you did this too, but they were paying, and this was the first time I heard of like paying money to have a game object or a game attribute, not real life, not physical things. And I was like, wow, that's a money-making scheme because it's literally just text. Like, that's amazing.
MUD is very niche. And like, I'm kind of curious to see how many of my listeners and your listeners
even have heard of it.
Like, yeah, because it is a very niche thing. There are still MUDs around, And I remember having to use Telnet to get into it. In fact, I was just I reminded myself today of Mud because I was using Telnet today for my job. And you don't really use Telnet. No one really uses Telnet too much unless you're trying to get into a box or get into like a server or something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, I used to use Telnet all the time to play Mud, and everyone had their name on there. And then if you were an admin, you could build out rooms and set up stuff. It required imagination. It
Yeah.
required it, and that's why I like the text based and I like the role playing games, because it requires your mind's eye to kind of fill in the blanks. So it's not all handed to you. You got to do a little bit of work with your imagination, and it was a great deal of fun. And I have fond memories of discovering the internet like that.
It's truly powerful to use your imagination in that way, and I really appreciate that about books and anything textual, really, because it does exactly that. And honestly, all the people I knew who did play Mud were some of the most intelligent people who I knew, so it's not an accident, I think. At what point did you realize that like the whole world was pretty fucked up and that weird shit was going on?
Oh, well, weird shit and fucked up is different.
That's
So
true.
I've always been drawn to the paranormal and weird stuff like that as long as I can remember. And I remember drawing a picture for my mother, and this is like in her first house. Like I remember I was in the kitchen and I drew a picture of a UFO with a little boy on top of it, and with the word bubble on top of the boy that says help, but I misspelled help. I spelled it like backwards or something like that, and I handed it to my mother. And I remember, I don't know what that means, but that memory stayed with me.
Wow.
And I remember seeing the Time Life magazines, like Time Life magazines, order today and you will discover the secrets of ESP, time travel, and all that. And I was like, I want those books, but I'm 7 and I can't afford them.
Yeah.
And but I remember going to the library and always going to those sections where the mysterious kind of esoteric kind of stuff or paranormal. There was no real category for it at that point in time, but I always read borrowing those books from the library, and I was like, wow, this is interesting stuff. Why is no one really talking about this?
Yeah.
I was like, this is not on the news. My family watched the news around the clock. I was raised by news junkies, but they never talked about UFOs unless a giant event happened. And the first major UFO event that I remember was the Phoenix Lights, and I remember seeing that on the news. And I was like, finally, they're talking about it. And at that point in time, I was probably 18, and my uncle was he was in Vietnam. He got out of Vietnam and started working for the Air Force Base down there in Tucson. And at the time, he was the head. He was like maybe the director of communications down there at the base in Tucson. And so the media was coming into the base asking him, what's going on? Is it one of ours? And he told me that the Phoenix Lights, according to him, and he talked to the base colonel and everyone, it is not ours.
Wow.
Now they came, but afterwards they came out and said, oh, it was flares dropped by the military. And I brought that up to him. He's like, no. He said it wasn't. We didn't have jet scramble. They weren't dropping flares. I talked to everyone there. It wasn't ours. Whatever it wasn't ours.
Wow.
I was like, wow. I was like, I saw a news report on TV, and they said it was UFOs, and then they said it was military flares. But my uncle, who's on the base, just flat out told me it's not ours. So I was like, okay, we're not being told everything here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's possible that it's not ours means that none of us know about it, but there's like secret deep black projects that it comes from,
course.
Right? Or maybe like another nation or something.
Oh, of course.
But
I took that as they didn't scramble jets to drop flares for some training exercise.
Yeah, at the very least.
Because I mean, at that point, I was already reading a lot of books on UFOs and talking about the reverse engineering program. The more you dug into it, you could find stuff on Area 51, because at that time Bob Lazar had already come out, and it was pretty close to the time where a book called The Day After Roswell was out on the market, and that was written by Colonel Philip Corso, and his experience in the Pentagon dealing with the research and development sector of the Pentagon, and that book was just huge. It broke a lot of people open that weren't used to the UFO phenomenon, and it's like, oh, this retired colonel is talking pretty openly about how the reverse engineering of alien material works within corporate America. Very fascinating. So
yeah, that's the stuff that starts to bring me towards thinking that perhaps there are actual real physical beings and nuts and bolts craft here visiting Earth. Is that where you lean towards, or do you think something else is going on?
I go back and forth. My opinion is varied. I read a lot of different like encounter stories, like personal stories from people that have encountered something. I was on I believe that there are physical, tangible craft that are from some different place that do somehow get here, and that they probably have been worked on by the government or some contractor for a very long time. At the same time, I think there's a next level up where it gets a little bit more goofy, where there's a different set of technology that can dip in and out of our dimension and can act in very different ways rather than just some advanced spacecraft that could take on the form of what we would call poltergeist, or that use something like portals and can generate a lot of different activity. So it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
I was at a point where I didn't really believe too many of the boots on the ground, like off the cuff encounters, like, oh, it's just a bunch of malarkey. But the more I read the accounts, there's a lot of similarities between what people experienced even back in like the early 1800s up until the mid 1950s, where people have very similar accounts, and there's some details to me that stick out. It's like, I don't believe a farmer in Oklahoma in 1953 is making something up or completely lifting the same story from some guy in Russia in 1820.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me. I think they probably had both independent, real experiences of some similar entity or similar intelligence.
Yeah, that gets really wild when you start looking at pulling those threads of like the similarities that go way far back, and then you have to wonder again, is this like, and sometimes too, have you noticed this too, where it changes according to the time and the technology just seems like a little bit ahead of that person's experience, but then you jump ahead 50 years or something and the technology is just a little bit ahead of that time period, or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you do notice that. And I've read a lot of these accounts where back in ranging from, like, say, year one up until like the 1500s, you would have reports of elves and dwarves, especially in the UK or Finland, the Nordic countries. They would be described as dwarves, gnomes, elves, stuff like that, and they would always be wearing some sort of uniform. Like there's a story from like the 1800s where this woman recalls she was out hanging up some laundry to dry. She turns around, she sees 3 dwarves all dressed in red jumpsuits, and she gets startled. She tries to run to go get her husband. Next thing you know, these things disappear. But she described them as dwarves, maybe because they were just short. But one of the commonalities that I see over and over again when you read these stories, no matter what decade, they seem to be wearing uniforms, and oftentimes they come in 3s.
Weird.
So that's a commonality. Another one is that they're often described as having skin-tight diving suits. That's what's often described. It's like, oh, it looks like they're wearing a diving suit,
like diving, like underwater diving,
like wearing like a form-fitting, wetsuit. They don't call it wetsuit. They call them diving suits, is what they're often referred to as. That's a very consistent description among most of the humanoid encounters that I've seen. Oftentimes described as silvery, too. And so a lot of them are described as having silvery form-fitting suits, sometimes with like a fishbowl on their head or a helmet, and sometimes with a wide belt. And it appears that there are multiple different types of entities, or these things are being interpreted different by our consciousness.
Yeah.
So, in some way, us, the viewer, is critically important on how these things are manifested. It's like whatever we are willing to accept into our reality, something like that is manifested for the human to interact with. And it just might be just pushed a little beyond their realm of reasoning or expectation, and that's why it might change from decade to decade, because there's only so much that they can really wrap their head around, and so it doesn't push it too far, just far enough to make it seem alien and foreign.
Interesting. It's very fascinating to think about. And then, is it that entity, that intelligence, that being is sort of like reading people's minds and then projecting out what works best with that person? Or is it that the person is only capable of like receiving, in whatever way, and that's just the way they're receiving it, like you kind of said?
So I think like John Keel, the author of many books, but most notably the Mothman Prophecies, he believes, and I'm paraphrasing here, and his views may have changed over time, that there is like a singular source to this intelligence. Whether or not like it's all the same thing or not, but it seems like I think he's of the opinion that there is like one source, and I think many different types of things can travel through it or be interpreted through that. Um, but there's like very strange things, like whether or not it's interpreted by us or we are critical as the viewer or not. Like there's just some things that I don't understand. Like I'll give you for instance, because I picked out this one. I don't know what to make of this, but this is I'll paraphrase it here. This is from May 4th, 1969, Brazil. There was a soldier out in the forest making his rounds. Next thing you know, he was approached by 4 short humanoids wearing silver jumpsuits. They take him to a craft, and so they load him into the craft. They take off, and he doesn't know where they're going, but they take off into air as far as he can recognize. Then he was approached by a 5th humanoid, and this humanoid had a hairy face, very long beard like ZZ Top, and this guy, this short hairy humanoid, is quizzing this Brazilian soldier about the capabilities of his weapons, human weapons, and how they may react to certain things. At that point in time, the soldier gets very concerned and starts praying. He holds his crucifix around his neck and starts praying to Jesus. This apparently angers the hairy little humanoid, rips the crucifix off the soldier's neck, throws it down. They land the vehicle back down, and they kick him out of the UFO. He wakes up, and he was missing for 4.5 days.
Wow.
What do you make of that?
Yeah, that sounds like Bigfoot. And you hear sometimes about Bigfoot and these entities working together, so that's interesting. It's also interesting because I've heard a lot of times people say that these entities will go away if you summon or, call on the energy known as Jesus, and that like ends it every time. So like, why? Are they evil?
That happens quite a bit. I've been just digging through like the humanoid stories. It happens quite a bit, even in the most recent. There's a recent documentary about the Mothman, where there was a person that was being harassed by a Mothman. I don't know. I mean, maybe harass is not the great word, but I guess if it's frightening you and coming into your house and causing you problems, yeah, it's harassing you.
Yeah.
And the man just decided to pray to Jesus. He said the Lord's Prayer, and he said that this Mothman creature just dissipated in front of his eyes.
Wow.
So how it definitely seems like us, we are, our brains and our consciousness is very powerful. We can control certain aspects of a reality with the power of thought and intention and belief in certain things. But at the same time, whatever these things are almost using our consciousness or whatever kind of receptors we have in our head as a launching pad to manifest themselves in our reality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've never thought of it quite that way. Like they have to use us in order to even be here at all. And I also wonder, we hear these stories of Jesus being invoked, and and whatnot. But I wonder in like other cultures if it's like Vishnu that's invoked, or like something else, and that would work too. And that, like you said, it's more like the intention, that this goodness, this holiness is going to help me dispel this darkness, more than like Jesus specifically.
Yeah, I'd like to know that too. I think I just started reading through a lot more of Jacques Vallée's work, and he does chronicle a lot of different cultures and interpretations of these activities. And I haven't found the parts where, oh, this person, he is praying to Jesus, the other person is praying to Allah, but they both have the same result of exercising these entities away from them. I haven't encountered that, but I'd love to know the answer, and I am definitely looking for it.
And I think it's cool if it is just some other type of entity that's not evil, that they respect free will, and they're like, okay, whatever, you don't want me here, I'm out. Like, whatever that, however that happens, that seems pretty cool. And I wonder, have you ever thought about whether these could be kind of beings from like a previous civilization, like prior to humans, and they're just still around, or like underwater realms or inner earth or any of that stuff?
I think I think that's what's confusing the messaging right now going on with the UFO release from the Pentagon. That report that's supposed to be released at the end of June here, and in the preview that came out was that it's not ours and it's not aliens. Basically, they're saying we don't know what it is, but they kind of, like the headline that I saw, they said it's not aliens, but then they kind of walked that back and said we don't know. And I wonder if those are like carefully chosen words, because what if those UFOs that are seen aren't aliens? They're actually like a previous human civilization that just are at the bottom of the ocean, or are so far advanced that they don't really need to interact with us that much. And so technically they're not lying. They're not aliens. They're us. It's just we split off. They're a parallel civilization just living at the bottom of the ocean. They've been here for a long time.
Oh, I
think
hope
that's
so.
I think
That'd be
that's
cool.
a very very real possibility. But I also believe that what we're seeing out there, at least when it comes to the Tic Tac stuff, the past 17 years, which most of the media is focusing on, I'm 75% leaning that is some of our craft out there, and that I think there's enough evidence to say that, oh, I think it's ours, and this is some kind of situation where we're being taken for a ride a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too, that like kind of all of the above might even be happening, like some of it's ours, secret ops or black ops or whatever, and they didn't want to cop to it, and so they're saying this, and some things are other entities, whether interdimensional or, other civilizations from this world or others, or all of the above, because that would just make it the most confusing thing possible that they get to take advantage of,
What's bizarre is, like, not only do you have everything going on with the Pentagon UFO report coming out at the end of June, which somehow the media is now finally taking serious after 50 years of making fun of the topic. Now you have CBS talking about it. You got ABC, NBC. Everyone's talking about it.
That is weird, yeah.
And I think they're realizing, Trump's gone. We got to make some money. What gets clicks? UFOs. And it does generate. But at the same time, there is a History Channel show called Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, where it's in season 2. And it's a little goofy. Obviously, they got to play up the suspense, but they're investigating all the paranormal activity going on at Skinwalker Ranch. And there are certain things that they're not doing, and I'm screaming at the TV. It's like, well, why aren't you trying this? For instance, like, they're going out there with a lot of scientific instrumentation, trying to document not only UFOs, but poltergeist activity, Bigfoot, Dogman, they're trying to get anything on tape. And they haven't brought out a seasoned professional in like yoga or meditation, or someone very centered with themselves.
Yeah.
Because if you read the book Hunt for Skinwalker, there's a story in there where the previous owner, the Gormans, or that's not their real name, that's what they're using the book, that the owner was approached by somebody who just wanted to come on to the ranch and meditate. And so the guy's like, okay, yeah, fine. I'll take you to a clearing. You can meditate. So the guy went over there, started meditating. The ranch guy, he just sat back and watched them. But then he heard this loud rumbling come through the forest. And he saw like a 9 to 8 foot translucent creature come out of the forest, stand right over the guy sitting on the ground doing the meditating, and just scream. It's like the act of meditating and centering your consciousness provoked that that entity, whatever it is, provoked that phenomenon to forcefully say, hey, no, you're not going to do that kind of crap here. Get out of here. And that scared the hell out of the guy. He left the property and never came back. But that kind of testing is not currently being done on the show. I don't know why they're avoiding using the power of prayer, which has been documented to get these entities away. Even if this is anecdotal and you think it's goofy, it's worth trying.
Still. Yeah.
They're not doing it.
That's crazy. Yeah, I hadn't heard that meditating story before, and it really makes me think that, that's the way. And like you said, why haven't they at least tried it? Like, get a group of people, all really seasoned meditators and prayer people all together to do this at the same time. I bet you could exercise that, and that's probably why that thing was so pissed.
Well, it makes me wonder if the U.S. government has done that with, hypothetically, let's say they have crashed vehicles from extraterrestrials and they don't know how to operate them. They think they are operated by telepathy or some sort of consciousness, and they don't have the mind to neural net technological capability right now. Then they would have to find a group of people that are naturally gifted at using their mind or centering themselves in order to control that craft. And that's one of when you dig deeper into like the UFO phenomenon, you get into the abduction phenomenon. And there are people that claim, like, I think there's alien abductions, but then there's the military abductions where it seems to be like they're looking for certain types of people that can maybe operate these craft with their mind. And that's even crazier to think about, that the military is like, we're up against the wall here. We don't know what to do. We can't figure these things out. Let's start yanking some of our own people out of their beds and seeing if they can work these things.
That's fascinating. That makes so much sense to me, because there's so many people who I feel like, with the abduction thing, that seem to be related to they're directly connected to the military, like their parents are high up or whatever. And that kind of makes sense to me with the military abductions. But then there's other people who aren't, that seem like military abductions. And then I'm always wondering, well, like, why them then? Do they just pick random people? But your explanation makes a lot of sense to me.
It seems like there are some people obviously gifted when it comes to using their mind. I'm open to people having extreme psychic abilities. I think some of that's been documented. I think through Dean Radin's book, Real Magic, it's been documented that all of us humans have the ability to use our belief and power of intention to influence the outcome of, say for instance, a coin flip, that we can influence that maybe 10% of the time. So that's very powerful. But there's probably people that's way more just naturally gifted that can tune in to whatever frequency that is to either do remote viewing, pick up on people's thoughts, maybe have some clairvoyance at times, or maybe fly a UFO around just by using the power of thought. And I don't know if you can teach like the test pilots that immediately. The people that you trust to take up like the most secret United States testing aircraft. I don't know if you're going to teach them to be at one with themselves, to let the universe in and make intuitive decisions with the craft. I don't know. Hopefully there's some people out there that can do that.
They probably found that not many people like that tended to join the military, and that's why they went abducting, but who knows?
I would imagine so.
But I almost wonder if we should hope that they don't find those people, because what are they going to do with that technology if they have it? So far, their track record is pretty poor.
See, and with another thing that I'm not hearing the media ask in this most recent round of UFO coverage is they're saying, oh, is this aliens or is this one of ours? They're not asking, hey, what kind of propulsion system are they using? And what is this energy source? And how can this address our immediate concerns of if your concern is about climate change? Can this address that? Probably. If your concern is about poverty, can that address that? Yes. It could address so many concerns and get us to such a level of positivity in this world. But those questions aren't even being asked on the mainstream media. They're just they're worried about like little green men. They're not even worried about that. They're not even talking about the implications of this for the economy of the world. We could be in Star Trek future within 50 years if we had the right people pushing for the right kind of agenda here. But it just seems like we're going to get a space tack for like a space war at some point in time.
Yeah, and whether fake or real, you know, whether maybe we'll scare these actual entities off and then just pretend fight so we can keep our stupid like scarcity economy moving instead of acknowledging that perhaps the universe is electric and that there's ways of propulsion that prove it and that we can then therefore have free energy forever. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't matter if it's real enough. People believe it is.
Yeah.
I think if we learned anything over these past few years is that the belief is very powerful and propaganda is very powerful.
Yeah.
And that if people believe that they're being attacked by some alien force from the dark side of the moon, 40% of the people, maybe 30%, they're going to be loud and they're going to believe it and they're going to guilt you into believing it too.
Or pretending to like not get beat to death or whatever. Yeah.
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 We're in a weird situation right now. We're on the cusp of UFO disclosure, and the conspiracy theorists are going, bullshit, those aren't aliens.
Yeah.
Something else is going on here. And I can just say, like, my friends are gonna be like, Mike, you've been waiting for this. You've been talking about aliens for 30 years, and you're not going to believe this. It's like, I'm not believing this version of it.
This version,
something else is going on here. Like, there's an angle going on here, and it just seems like everything thus far has been to get the scientific community on board with the idea of aliens visiting us. Because if you don't have trust to science, you don't have the rest of the public on board for any kind of action. So I suspect by the end of the summer, we'll have some sort of scientific panel convened by the Senate or Congress to investigate UFOs in a very public way so science can be all in agreement on this.
Very, very good prediction. I'm sure you're right. And yeah, it doesn't matter what's actually real. It just matters what people think. And they'll ignore the fact that this was ignored for however many years, many decades, and that now it's being brought out in this very specific way at a very specific time for a very specific reason. But have you had experiences yourself with these things?
With UFOs, I think I've seen one. I saw some pretty interesting stuff out in Sedona. So my wife and I got married in Sedona, Arizona. And before our wedding night, we decided to go out night vision goggle UFO spotting. You know, so they take you out in the middle of the desert in Sedona with where UFOs are coming through and doing things, but you put the night vision goggles on and it just opens up the entire sky. And we sat out there for a few hours and I definitely saw stuff leaving orbit. I saw a light in the sky that was like traveling like between two stars, stop, and then just keep going. I saw stuff. I know my wife saw stuff. My mom saw stuff. I believe my little brother saw stuff. It just, you're amazed when you put those goggles on how vivid it all is, how many stars out there and how many lights are traveling around that are not blinking in a typical aviation way. There are obviously planes going around, and there probably are some secret planes going around too, or some sort of test vehicles. But the ones that if they are test vehicles, they're leaving orbit and they're not blinking.
Yeah. And they're like sudden turns sometimes or way too fast, and you're like, come on.
Very, very quickly. It seemed like they were moving very quickly, too fast for a satellite, and pausing in mid-orbit and then keeping going. I guess a satellite can pause if it wants to. But from what my opinion from when I saw it, it didn't seem like it was normal aircraft.
Definitely. Did you have, like, were the people with you, had they ever had any sort of experiences before? Were they sort of skeptics, or were their minds blown? Or
my wife and I are on the same page when it comes to this stuff. My mom is a religious woman, but is on the same page. She's very open to it. My dad was just kind of like, it's interesting, but it hurts my neck looking up so much.
Busy.
The other people in the group, there were some strangers there. They were very optimistic and very open to it. One was he was a camera guy from a local news station, and he seemed very open to it. I think they saw some stuff, but I didn't see anybody like we didn't have like a wow event there where there was a definitive close UFO that we all could agree upon. We each individually saw stuff that we think that was pretty incredible. And you spotted stuff. We're like, oh, take it. Here's a laser. Check that one out. And we all agree that there was some goofy stuff going on in the air. And out there in the desert, that night sky, you see a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot less light pollution too, and so even with night vision goggles, that helps. What did you try to interact with any of them psychically or mentally, or were the lasers for that?
So the lasers were mostly just to pinpoint things out. Did not try to interact with them mentally. My wife tried a few times. She saw some objects down in Phoenix. Tried to say, hey, we're here, and show yourselves. But no interaction, no back and forth, no hits just yet. But Arizona's a great state to try that, though.
Yeah, Arizona and Utah, but maybe don't go too close to the Skinwalker area.
Don't open yourself to that. Not just yet.
And have you ever had any other types of experiences that are like paranormal-ish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In college, I was haunted. Like my freshman year, it was like we were in a dorm. It was like art college, and like the first few nights, we were all smoking pot. That's what you do in art school,
of course.
And but I was used to smoking pot, and I did it for years at that point. But I was laying down to go to bed, and I heard this whispering from the corner of my room, and it was me in the room and my roommate Windsor. He was fast asleep, and I looked over, and it's like, okay, the whispering's not coming from him. So I tried to go back and laid back down to sleep. Heard more whispering from the corner, which it was pretty close to my desk, and I was like, I got to be just hearing things. So I laid my head down to try to go to sleep, and then I heard whispering through my pillow. And
Yikes.
I sat up after that and got the hell out of there and slept in the lobby pretty much for the next week. But throughout the year, there were other things going on. Like my roommate said they were in my room, and they said there's an art box on my bed, and it just flew off my bed. And then I heard one time I was washing the dishes in there, and I heard a big shh behind me. That happened a few times. So that was goofy. That was
creepy,
kind of sporadic throughout the entire year. And then we were on vacation when I was like 13, and the entire house at Myrtle Beach, my family and my friend Mike, who was with us, we all had a paranormal experience there, where my brother and our friend Mike were in a room, and they saw the ceiling ripple simultaneously. I heard like laughter going on.
Weird.
And so we all slept in the living room that night. My mom was like, okay, yeah. And my mom was like, whatever, I'll sleep in your room, Michael. And I was like, go ahead, go for it. And so she slept in my room that night, and she confirms that she heard like children laughing.
Wow.
And so there's like 4 people in that house that experienced something going on there.
Independently, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
And terrifying too.
Yeah, it is terrifying. 'Cause you're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what its intentions are. Like, it's scary. What do you think it was, and why do you think it was?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it was. I think that when it comes to ghosts and paranormal events like that, energy gets trapped in solid objects, and solid objects record some sort of impression. Whether it's some sort of emotion is very important. So whether it's a happy, great emotion, or the pits of despair, that permeates the room. When you walk into when there's someone pissed and you walk into a room, you can kind of feel it.
Mm-hmm.
I think those kind of feelings get pressed into objects, whether it's a structure or a rock or whatever. I think it just kind of exists there until it's ready to be replayed. And I think that requires us, the viewer, to be open to that replay.
I was going to say, I wonder if you kind of invited it in some way by being interested in it, or like maybe you were sleeping in the bed of someone who had died and they were like, get the fuck out of my bed in the dorm room. Like, why are you in my way? Who knows?
It's possible, because we did play with a Ouija board when, well, right around when I was, I don't know, it's right around that age, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that can do it. Very interesting. Well, I know we have to start to wrap up, but I want to ask you a few more questions. And one is, why Midnight Mike?
So I used to play in a band, and my drummer called me Midnight Mike because I was always out. I was always out at a bar. I would not be home very early. So he's like, "You're Midnight Mike," and I mean that's what it sounds like. And I was like, yeah, I'll keep the
Sounds good.
name.
Yeah.
I'll keep the name, because I was like, I would be at home no earlier than like 2:00. So 2 a.m. So that changed drastically recently. So
yeah, now it's real hard to stay up that late for me at least.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, age will get all of us. Well, do you have anything coming up that you want to share with people, or anything on Union of the Unwanted or your OBDM podcast, or anything else you want to share with people, and where people should go to connect with you and find more from you?
Oh, yeah, sure. So if people so choose, you can go to obdmpod.com or ourbigdumbmouth.com, and we have links to the RSS feed, the audio only, YouTube. We stream live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time and Saturdays at noon. And I've been trying to dig a little deeper into humanoid encounters, trying to find commonalities or some sort of pattern when it comes to these strange encounters. I'll be working on time slips, people who slip into different time periods coming up here soon.
Cool.
So, and there's plenty of encounters like that. And we just got done with Monster May, where I covered a different monster every week.
That's awesome.
So we try to have fun over there. It's goofy, it's crass. It usually takes people about 2 to 3 episodes, just because it's a very fast-paced show, and we don't ever shut up. So.
It sounds like a blast. I hope people go check it out. I'll have to tell you some of my weird experiences someday.
I'd love to hear it.
But until then, what are your final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
Be positive. Because, the world may seem like it's in a difficult spot, but the most important thing is to be optimistic and love the ones around you, and talk to them. Talk to them all the time.
Very good advice. Very wise. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom according to the Midnight Warrior, Midnight Mike. Mike, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight and being here on Rogue Ways.
Thank you.
Midnight is more than just a time. It is a way of life and a dinosaur-filled orientation toward the truth. Whatever speed your clock is running at, you can find your rhythm and tempo exactly suited to some of the best creativity and powerful outlets if you are simply true to yourself. Always dig deep and always do it while remembering how truly weird life is and how truly weird each of us is. Never forgetting to play all along the entire way. And until you master the art of playful weirdness in pursuit of truth, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
I heard the Freemasons called you. Man, they at it again. And I'm out to tell the truth once more. That's right. It's on the cracking, unknown in the house. APOGZ, that's right. Hitting the stereo near you. Truth is the best thing. And it's on. Yo, I once thought that I wanted to get them on track, but there's something more bigger than that. Something lurking, waiting to blow this state right off the map. A hidden agenda related to September. Doves carved up on the wall next to the highway. Up in the concrete, while rolling home next to where I stay. With state's destruction, like Key Martin malfunction. While NORAD's in the mountain anticipating our next move. My heart's jumping and I'm like, fuck waiting. While crooked taxes are burning a hole in my pocket. With $1 bill in the pyramid that's watching. Instead of having a capstone on top of it, they have an eye with a fast surprise while you're flossing it. Greedy niggas jocking it, politics plotting it. So who you vote for really doesn't mean shit. So save your energy from being drained by the enemy. Skull and bones of Freemasonry, envisioning dreams of them chasing me. Skull and bones of Freemasonry, envisioning dreams of them chasing me. Skull and bones of Freemasonry, secret agencies with a plan to dominate all of man. Check the records of DIA, strange murals and paintings similar to the ones next to the highway. With pyramids and flames underneath them looking like they're about to fly away. I can't be tripping, but it sounds like I'm on acid. Most people slipping, taken below DIA, held captive in the near future, where they won't hesitate to reinstate new laws for a bigger cause. I'm talking about established civilian concentration camps, introducing the military's labor programs. Expand your mind just a little bit, forget the little shit before you witness the belittlement of your people. Expand your mind just a little bit, forget the little shit before you witness the belittlement of your people.
Feds ain't stretching the truth, the script that he's spitting is true. Pay attention to what's going on or it might happen to you. When it's happening to you, cellular communication monitor, behavior studied and controlled through chemicals bombing the nerve. This word of Jesus ain't got anything to do with it, religious cynic, where experiments cage and lace in terms of accepting limits. Things they can't explain to the sky when I'm in the Rockies. Chakra systems limited due to the voltage overhead pipe. Mind control victims, slap clips and machine guns for recess. FCC will help us speak less, manipulate us through weak feel right now fiction with the CIA trying to kill me filthy. Talking about the underground facility at DIA, no one feels that place laced with hints. Notice whenever I return home, lack some references in a new world Masonic capstone. Croy in Area 51 workers the building, I don't mean to rant. In the face of an emergency, it doubles as a FEMA camp. The reaction, solution, trickery, repeated through history. NORAD's listening in using technology, tracking where you piss. I'm not even paranoid or just facing the fact. Better watch what you say, it's another day under the Patriot Act.
Extend your mind just a little bit, forget the little shit before you witness up a little bit of your people. Extend your mind just a little bit, forget the little shit before you witness up a little bit of your people.
The idea is to bring people to the point where they are helpless, passive, and unable to assert their own creative power to form anything else. Success for people like this is measured in terms of money, which they then translate into power. Corruption and violations of the Constitution. Secret societies, the push for one world government. I'd like to get corruption and violations of the Constitution. The idea is to bring people to the point where they are helpless, passive, and unable to assert their own creative power to form anything else.